JFK's assassination, who and why?
Oh, gee, that's a big one.
2 or 3 minutes on that, and we'll just go through this list.
2 or 3 minutes.
If you can.
Okay.
If you can.
Well, a fellow by the name of Jorge Morales is apparently the guy who was actually the trigger guy. He was part of a 15-man unit that was nicknamed the S-Force. It was codenamed S-Force. And this was an assassination team that was put together originally to kill Fidel Castro. And it was put together at the request of Richard Nixon when he was Vice President of the United States under Eisenhower back in 1960. In June of 1960, Nixon received the Republican nomination for the presidency. He had been for 8 years the Vice President under Eisenhower, and in that capacity he had chaired the 5412 Committee, which is a subcommittee of the National Security Council in charge of covert operations. He had become very active during that period from January of 1959 to June of 1960 in Cuba because of the overthrow by Fidel Castro of the Batista government in January of 1959. And Nixon had resolved that once he had gotten the nomination for the presidency for the Republican Party, he was convinced he was going to win the presidency. And so he wanted to have an assassination team put together to kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and 5 other major leaders of the new Cuban revolutionary government. He used to say, cut off the head and the body will die. And so he contacted Howard Hughes, who had for a number of years been working with the National Security Council as a consultant on technology things. He had built the Glomar Explorer, he had built the prototype for the C-5A cargo plane through the Summa Corporation, which had been put together by Howard Hughes. And Richard Nixon had developed a fairly good working relationship with Howard Hughes. And so he contacted him by safe phone in Nixon's capacity as the nominee for the Republican Party and the sitting chair of the 5412 Committee, and said that he wanted to have Howard Hughes put together an assassination team to kill these people. But he didn't want to track back. It wasn't in the 5412 Committee, wasn't authorizing it or asking him to do it. It was Nixon personally, and asking Howard Hughes to do this in such a way that it didn't track back to the president or anything. So Howard Hughes contacted one of his lawyers, a fellow named Bob Mayhew, and asked Mayhew to set this up in a way so that it wouldn't track back to the president. And this is at the time when Howard Hughes was out in Las Vegas.
Sequestered away in his penthouse?
Yes, up in, because I think it was the Sands Hotel that he purchased, and he was up on the top floor. So he contacted Bob Mayhew and asked Mayhew to make this happen. Bob Mayhew contacted Johnny Roselli, who was the liaison in Las Vegas for Sam Giancana, the mafia boss out of Chicago. And Bob Mayhew said, look, Roselli, you guys want this done yourself, but the president, I want you to do this. Could you do this in such a way that it wouldn't lead back to the president? And so Johnny Roselli contacted Sam Giancana, went to see him and told him that Nixon had asked to have this done. Sam Giancana said, well, look, we need to contact Santo Trafficante, because Trafficante is the mafia don of Cuba. He's now up in Tampa, in Florida, where he has fled with a lot of the other people that fled back in January of '59 when Castro set up the new government. Most of the organized crime people fled. Castro shut down the heroin trafficking, the prostitution rings, the gambling casinos, etc., and so they fled. So they had a series of meetings. 3 meetings took place in July of 1960 at the Fontainebleau Hotel among Bob Mayhew, Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, and Santo Trafficante. They eventually, in the 3rd meeting, agreed that this would be done. But Santo Trafficante and Sam Giancana wanted to make certain the president had asked for this to be done.
How far in advance of the assassination was this?
This was now in July of 1960. This is 2.5 years before the Kennedy assassination.
And this gets to the question of why.
That's okay. This is
okay.
What happens.
Okay.
Is that what happened is that they agreed to do this. They wanted to make sure the president had authorized this. So they said to Roselli and to Sam Giancana, you got to get president to give us a communication that this is coming directly from him. So there was another final meeting took place there at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and a guy came to the meeting who used the code name Mr. Ed, and it was Sheffield Edwards. Sheffield Edwards was chief of security for the Central Intelligence Agency's operations director, and said that yes, the Nixon wanted this done, and gave him the green light. They went ahead. They decided the way they would do this. Trafficante said, "Look, the way we're going to do this is in order to protect ourselves. We're going to recruit the actual assassins from the Operation 40, which was a covert operation that was going on by the Central Intelligence Agency based out of Miami, Florida, in which they had recruited a lot of the anti-Castro Cubans who had fled, particularly people that worked with Sam Giancana in organized crime. And they had organized a covert operation to sneak into Cuba and burn fields and blow up bridges and poison sugar crops and do this kind of harassment of the administration, trying to show that the Cuban revolutionary government couldn't really sustain themselves. And so there was this whole covert operation going. This was authorized under the 5412 Committee of the CIA and Nixon. So what Giancana and Trafficante decided, look, we'll recruit guys out of that CIA operation, but there are people who used to be gunzels for us down in Cuba, who protected the casinos and the prostitution and the drug running and stuff, so that we'll get our old guys who we know and have confidence in, but they also are working for the Operation 40, the CIA, so if they, for any chance, were to get caught, they won't be prosecuted by the federal government, because if they did that, it might reveal their covert operations activities. So it was a very ingenious kind of way of going about doing it. They set up the operation after July, August, and September of 1960. They recruited 15 guys. They were taken from 5 different paramilitary bases that were all along the southern coast. There was one at Swan Island. There was one at there was a Star Island. It was called Star Island. And there was one at a place called No Name Key. There was another one in the Everglades in Florida. And there were 2 of them in Louisiana, at Lake Pontchartrain. One was on the southern end and one was on the northern end of Lake Pontchartrain. These 5 bases, these 15 men were recruited out of these bases, and they were brought to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where they basically disappeared into the bowels of Fort Huachuca and were registered as staying there. But they, in fact, were taken down to Oaxaca, Mexico, at a ranch down there. It was owned by Cliff Murchison, the Murchison family that owned the Dallas Cowboys later. They owned the Hialeah in California. They were Hialeah is the track where J. Edgar Hoover used to go for his little trysts and gambling things out there. So they owned the ranch at Oaxaca, and this is where it was set up. And that they were being trained to kill Castro. And what happened is that, unfortunately, from their point of view, Nixon didn't get elected. John Kennedy beat him. So even though John Kennedy had been advised about Operation 40 that was going on, he was never advised about the assassination operation because it wasn't official. It wasn't the CIA doing it. It wasn't the 5412 Committee doing it. And it was a completely private operation, they said, basically. So they didn't tell him about it. So comes April of 1961, after the November election of the Kennedys, and the Bay of Pigs operation goes down, which had been planned under Nixon as the vice president. They had transmuted the Operation 40, which was kind of a hit and run operation, into the full Bay of Pigs invasion, which they anticipated was going to go down in April after President Nixon came into office, and he was going to allow this covert operation to land on the beach at Bay of Pigs, and then he was going to recognize them as the legitimate government and send in the United States Marines to back them and overthrow the government in Cuba. And when Kennedy came in, he said he wouldn't agree to do that. The agency was telling them that when they landed on the beach and raised the free flag of Cuba, that everybody was going to revolt in Cuba because they hated Castro. They would all come to their aid and it would work. Kennedy said, well, I'll take you at your word. If you say that's going to happen, then good. Then you don't need us and we aren't going to send in the Marines. He did, in fact, agree to send in air cover, totally contrary to what a whole bunch of rumors are.
Mm-hmm.
They sent in air cover out of Nicaragua. Somoza actually supported that. And, but it got there an hour late because they were in different time zones. That's what happened, actually. And as they all get stranded on the beach and they get pounded on the beach and get arrested. And Kennedy steps forward and says, okay, look, mea culpa, this was dumb, it was a bad idea, but I take full responsibility for this. And he apologized to Khrushchev for it and agreed to shut down the whole program. But he didn't. They actually just transformed Operation 40. They retreated back into Operation 40, renamed it, codenamed it Operation Mongoose. They set it up at the University of Miami. They had it at a place codenamed JM Wave, big airplane hangar they had there where they were working out of, and continued the operations. Now, because of that, Khrushchev, who had been now lied to by Kennedy, got furious about that. And he saw them as basically building up to a new invasion. And so he sent missiles in to Cuba. They started setting all these missiles up. And by October of 1962, now this is between April of 1961 and in October of 1962, basically a year and a half later, the missiles are discovered. The huge missile crisis comes down, which everybody knows about. We came right to the very brink of total thermonuclear war.
Perhaps worse than most people realize. Perhaps
a
closer.
lot worse.
Yeah.
The fact is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff voted unanimously to go to first strike against the Soviet Union because they had Kennedy had issued an ultimatum at the demand of the Security Council, saying that or the National Security Council that there was a line of a longitude in the ocean where if the ships that were carrying new missiles to Cuba that were being monitored by live NSA real-time satellites, if they crossed a particular line of longitude or latitude, that longitude, they would be considered in a technical state of war with the United States. And actually, one of the ships came and crossed over the line. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff went into session. I think it was October 12th of '62, and voted unanimously to go to first strike, to launch a first strike against the Soviet Union. And Kennedy refused to do that after actually receiving, I told you yesterday,
I would like to
about this
segue right into
communique.
that.
We can just, let's put it on the side table.
Sure.
Received a communication from Pope John XXIII telling him about the third secret of Fatima, and that this had to do with nuclear war, and that you couldn't be allowed to do this, and Kennedy and Khrushchev withdrew from this. They backed away from this and said, and Kennedy now promised Khrushchev that he would shut down the paramilitary bases that were conducting these attacks against Cuba. And so actually Kennedy issued the orders to shut down all those 5 paramilitary bases. They refused to do it. They said, well, screw you. You in fact, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, you actually came to Miami and stood in the stadium in Miami and said that the free flag of Cuba would fly over Cuba before the end of your administration. Now here you are shutting down these things, and we refuse to do it. And they actually, out of no name key, they actually, the Star Island, they actually launched an additional attack against Cuba. And Kennedy went ape over this. And he
a Marine attack?
No. The covert operations guys went in and blew up some bridges and burned another sugar field and continued their operations after Kennedy had ordered them to stand down. So John and Bobby, now this was like in December of 1962. And so by January of 1963, Bobby and John were so upset about this, they actually launched a helicopter gunship attack against Star Island. They sent in helicopter gunships manned by FBI and U.S. Marshals in these big blue jumpsuits and fully automatic M16s and flak jackets and helmets, and went in and attacked them and arrested them all and burnt out the whole base. And we're going to prosecute them for violations of the Federal Neutrality Act. But then let them go. And said that's a shot across the bow that everybody else should now take us seriously, shut down these bases. Well, it turns out they didn't. They still continued to launch another attack. So in late February, early March, a second attack was launched by Kennedy. Bobby and John sent in helicopter gunships into the Everglades and burnt out that second base and arrested them all and brought them in and started to prosecute them. At which point, this 15-man squad that had been organized to kill Castro, and who was made up of people that were in those paramilitary groups, did a 180. And they said, look, this Kennedy is a traitor. He, in fact, promised us that he was going to overthrow the Cuban government. He's now betrayed us, and he's actually launching attacks against us, physically attacked us. And they decided, the 15-man squad decided they were going to kill Kennedy. Now, a very dear friend of mine actually was physically present during one of these meetings where this was discussed, actually, that they were going to do this. He was actually on board the Flying Tiger 2, which was the yacht of William, what's his name? I'll think of his name in a second. Anyway, this guy, let's see. I'll think of his name anyway. Anyway, it was on his yacht, and they had decided, the assassination team had decided to try one more attempt against Castro, because in June, now this was in June of 1963, in June of 1963, Bobby found out about the assassination team. William, I hadn't thought about that, it's a lot of time, but William something or other, one of the FBI guys, William Sullivan, told Bobby, found out about this assassination team that had been operating, told Bobby about it. Bobby was livid about this. He'd been, going after the organized crime people and all this kind of stuff. He said, and here, they've got this operation going in cahoots with, Sam Giancana and Trafficante. This is crazy. Undermines my entire authority and everything. So he ordered the assassination team to be disbanded. And they decided that they were going to take one more pass at Castro before they could pretend they didn't get the order. And so this was in June of 1963. And so they sent in another operation to try to attack Castro. And they did so.
This group of 15?
There were 5 of them. There were 5 of them out of the 15 that were going in to do this attack. And they were flown out of Miami at Corrosion Corner. They flew them out on an airplane. A seaplane landed them. And then this Flying Tiger 2 came along and picked them up and took them off.
Yacht?
Yeah, private yacht. Took them offshore.
So these guys are totally rogue outside.
That's right. Well, they are and they aren't.
Yeah.
Because that they'd gotten the go-ahead earlier from the chief of security for CIA, and it was a whole kind of initial off-the-shelf operation that they had going.
Right.
And so that night,
but they were so gung-ho to finish their mission.
That's what they wanted to get them.
Stand down.
And so this 5-man group had been put ashore, and this little rubber dinghy were going ashore, and my friend was with them, was on board the yacht, and he was there when this guy, whose name is escaping me right now. Anyway, on board this yacht, he was there with the people that were left on board, and they were actually drinking Jack Daniels and shooting tracer bullets off the ship out into the sea, getting drunker, waving, and the.
Meanwhile, this operation's being launched off the back.
They're all going ashore, and they're just waiting for him to come back, right? And one of the guys, a anti-Castro Cuban guy connected with the mob out of Miami, was bitching and complaining about Kennedy. What a motherfucker, and this guy that I was telling you about, the guy who owned the Flying Tiger 2, turned to him and said, "Don't you worry about him. We're going to kill that motherfucker." Stone cold, just like that. And my guy stood right there, looked him right in the eye, and knew it was true. And of course, these are the guys that could do that. And they planned to kill him in Miami, and they were going to shoot him in Miami. And Kennedy was scheduled to come in October into Miami for appearance, getting ready for the campaign in '64, right? But the word got out that there was a major security danger in Miami, so he didn't go to where he was supposed to go. He came in and out and stayed in secure circumstances and then left, so they didn't get to take a pass at him. And so then they decided to do it in Texas. And so they did it in Dallas, and they hit him. And now the minute, and now this was a decision made by these extreme right-wing anti-Castro Cubans that were in this 15-man unit, this S-Force group. And they're the ones that made the decision to kill him. And it was not, in fact, a decision made from some big high level, let's all kill him because he's going to pull out of Vietnam or any of that kind of stuff. It was these guys who had their, I mean, these guys will kill you for stepping on their dog. I mean, and these guys decided they were going to do that. And so they just turned 180 and they killed him in Dallas. And when the word went out that, that it was Harvey Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald was being sought as the shooter, everybody who knew about the S-Force knew that this had been the S-Force that had done this. Because Lee Harvey Oswald is the guy that the S-Force was setting up to take the fall for killing Castro.
A patsy from the very beginning.
Patsy, that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he was involved with him.
No.
Pardon?
Knowingly on Oswald?
With him, no. He didn't know about it.
Yeah.
He was actually involved in one of the places at Lake Pontchartrain. This is the piece that Jim Garrison got a hold of. Jim Garrison found out that he was that Oswald was actually involved in helping to supply the military equipment to one of these bases at Lake Pontchartrain. And so therefore he tracked them and ended up trying to get at them, knowing that that had something to do with the assassination. And he was kind of groping around trying to get at that. And that's what the JFK movie is about, telling about that Oliver Stone did. That there was a piece that Garrison actually got called On the Trail of the Assassins. He was on the trail, but he was a fairly good distance off the trail. But he was pounding around on who these people were. But as soon as the word came out that Oswald was the one that was being sought for the killing, everybody who knew about the S-Force said, holy, this was the S-Force that did this. Oh, they've got to cover it up. And so all the apparatus that would have rolled into place to conceal an assassination by these people rolled into place, to starting to destroy evidence and to lie and cover up things and do all that kind of stuff, including the word that went down for having Tippit go kill Oswald, track him down and kill him. Tippit was one of the guys inside the Dallas Police Department that used to be on the take from Sam Giancana, and that's why Jack Ruby was the bag man for Giancana at the circus club there, in Dallas, and so that the Tippit was ordered to go kill this guy, and so as soon as Oswald saw him, he knew what this was, and so Oswald killed him right on the spot, just gunned him right down like that, and kept on trying to flee, and that's why Giancana sent in the order to Jack Ruby to go kill Oswald, because that he was supposed to have been killed by Tippit, and they didn't get him because they had to get rid of him, or else he could start talking about the whole operation. So anyway, that's what happened. And so that what happened is there was so much energy put into covering this up and lying and killing other people and conniving and doing all this to conceal all of that, because they were terrified that it would come back and they would think that the CIA had killed Kennedy. Worse yet, they would think that Nixon had killed Kennedy, because he's the one that put the actual team together.
Got the ball rolling.
But none of that was true. But they engaged in activity that would be legally considered circumstantial evidence in their covering up and concealing and destroying evidence and all that, just as though they were the guilty parties. And so they were so terrified about it being discovered that it was the S-Force that had done this, they conducted themselves after the fact, just as though they had known about it and were trying to conceal the whole thing. And so that there's massive amounts of circumstantial evidence around, if you look at it from that point of view, that would lead back to whoever, because that's an actual rule of law. If in fact you can show that a party, after the commission of a crime, has engaged in activity to try to conceal the perpetrators of the crime, it's a right, you have a right, legal right, to presume that they were involved in the original planning of the crime. But it doesn't mean that it's in fact true. It's just a legal presumption that you're allowed to use in the law. And when you're dealing with something as sensitive as this, you need to be extraordinarily precise about what you're really doing. So I don't think that it's proper to exercise, in a sense, a legal fiction into believing that these people must have been involved in the thing at the start of the thing. But we do know that Pauley, this guy's name is William Pauley, and we do know that William Pauley knew about it. And William Pauley was very, very intimately connected with this assassination operations. We do know that the two coordinators from the liaison from the CIA to this
William Pauley is
S-Force.
the yacht owner?
William Pauley is,
Okay.
is the yacht owner.
Okay.
And we do also know that E. Howard Hunt and one other guy, can't think of his name right now, were the actual liaison from the Central Intelligence Agency to the S-Force. So they were actually intimately involved with these people. So there's some reason to believe that they would have known about this thing. And that's why later on, the break-in in the Watergate Hotel that was undertaken to, it's related directly to it, that the break-in at the Watergate Hotel was undertaken by members of the S-Force. That Bernard Barker and all these guys were part of the S-Force, because they were sent in to wiretap the telephones of Larry O'Brien, because Larry O'Brien, who had just become the head of the Democratic National Committee for 25 years, had been the Washington lobbyist for Howard Hughes. And when he ended up quitting as the major lobbyist for Howard Hughes, it was a big power struggle over the Hughes empire when he became a vegetable, basically. And a three-way power struggle broke out between Bob Mayhew, his lawyer, who had done all this kind of eminent goodies stuff, and Larry O'Brien and this Mormon group that used to physically take care of Howard Hughes. A three-way power struggle broke out. The first one to lose was Larry O'Brien. Within a month after having lost out on that power struggle, he resigns as the head of the bureau of the lobbyist firm in Washington and becomes the head of the Democratic National Committee to run the campaign against Nixon. And Nixon became terrified that Larry O'Brien may know about the fact that it was Nixon who contacted Howard Hughes to actually put the assassination team together back in 1960, which ended up being the ones that killed Kennedy. And so Nixon ordered the plumbers to go in and find out, to wiretap the telephones of Larry O'Brien. But he didn't dare tell anybody else what it is they had to be looking for. So they got guys from the S-Force to actually go in. And they're the ones that did it. And when they got caught, and Bernard Barker had a check in his pocket, the check in his pocket was actually written from the Banco Internacional in Mexico City, from an account by the name of an attorney by the name of Osario. Turns out that was the account they used to finance the Oaxaca, Mexico triangular fire team base from. That the monies that were skimmed off the casinos would go into the Miami National Bank owned by Meyer Lansky, and then was wired into the International Credit Bank in Geneva, Switzerland, and then were wired down into the Banco Internacional, into this account by this lawyer, Osario, from which they funded the assassination training base. And because these were the same guys, they actually put the money through the same account to pay the guys to do the burglary. And when they got caught with him in his pocket, this is the smoking gun conversation that went on in the Watergate tapes. This is the famous June 23rd conversation where John Dean comes into the White House Oval Office and he says, with Bob Haldeman, he says, Mr. President, we think we've got a problem here. Pat Gray, the new head of the FBI, because Hoover had just died, Pat Gray just called me and said that he's been asked to conduct this investigation on this check that was found in the pocket of Bernard Barker that was written at this bank down in Mexico. He wants to know if that's going to cause any problem for the White House. And so Nixon says, a big long hesitation, he said, John, I want you to go get in touch with Vernon Walters and Dick Helms over at the agency, and you have them go to the FBI and tell them to get the hell out of this investigation right now. And John Dean said to him, well, what am I supposed to tell them? Why? Why are they supposed to do this? And he said, well, you tell Vernon Walters and Dick Helms, if they don't get the FBI out of this investigation right now, it could all lead to the opening up of all this Mexico stuff about the Bay of Pigs guys. That's how he referred to them. All the Mexico stuff about the Bay of Pigs guys. And that's what this was. That was the triangular fire team base in Oaxaca. And he didn't want that exposed. But if he told the agency guys that, then they'd know what that meant. And when that was the smoking gun tape of Nixon actually giving the order to use the CIA to get the FBI to stop the investigation. And that's what he was impeached for, was the actual obstruction of justice. But people didn't really realize what the heck it was all about. They still didn't say, what the hell was that all about? What did that mean when he said something like that? And they said, well, let's not talk about what it means. Let's just, it's clearly an obstruction of justice. So let's impeach him on that. But when he sent that word to Vernon Walters into Helms, they both interpreted it as a threat from Nixon, that if the agency didn't move in and get the FBI to stop the investigation, that stuff could all come out and it would lead back to the agency. And people would think that the agency was involved in the assassination group that killed Kennedy. And so Dick Helms and Vernon Walters contact Robert Bennett Robert Bennett is the new lobbyist now in Washington, D.C., and is Deep Throat. And they say to him,
He is, or
he is.
He is.
That's Deep Throat.
That's what Deep Throat is.
Yeah, and so he says to him, look, you know, we got to push the button on Nixon. And so Bennett starts giving information to Bob Woodward right away about the money trail and where it goes. And Bob Woodward had been the point briefer for U.S. Naval Intelligence to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's where he came from. Everybody goes, oh, what a great reporter. You know, he got a really good scoop on that. Well, I'll say he did. He was the point briefer for U.S. Naval Intelligence to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was handpicked. He was handpicked by Ben Bradley.
That's not very widely known.
No, nobody knows that.
Yeah.
But Ben Bradley was 8 years Central Intelligence Agency.
Huh.
Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post, was handpicked by Catherine Graham, because he was a CIA guy that had been close relations with her husband. And so that she brings in a guy out of the Central Intelligence Agency to be the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, and he brings in the point briefer for U.S. Naval Intelligence to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who ends up being a guy that Bennett brings the information to. And that's how it happened.
Well, this gets right into another question I want to ask. I want to get back to the Fatima predictions.
Yeah, sure.
Let's come back to that when you want to. You just talked about, CIA people being appointed to run major mass media.
Yeah.
Begs the question a little bit: is there really a conspiracy to control information around the world, especially in the United States? And how does that mechanism function? And how come journalists at the mid and lower levels of that are naive or oblivious?
Well, the answer is yes, there is.
Yes.
We established back during the Iran-Contra investigation, we actually obtained internal documents from the Central Intelligence Agency that stated that there were 42 full-time Central Intelligence Agency employees that were placed inside the major media.
Is that document available for public viewing?
I've got it. I mean, I've got it on all of our files. I mean, I've got all the files.
Could the average person look that up and see that document?
No.
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 Freedom of Information Act requests won't.
I don't know whether they would ever turn it over to the Freedom of Information Act.
Are the names visible or are they blacked out?
No, they're blacked out.
Mm-hmm.
They're blacked out.
And this is in the 70s. This document was obtained.
Oh, this was actually in the late 80s that we got this document.
Okay.
But it turns out that
and where was that document?
it had been it's a Central Intelligence Agency internal document, but it had actually been obtained by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Strangely enough, no, I take that back. It was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. That's the one.
Do you want to continue? Just asking the questions about the CIA document naming people inside the media.
That's right. So that's where it came from. It came from apparently the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. Frank Church's committee got a copy of that, which would have put it back in 75, 76 that you're talking about. So that's where, as of 1976, remember when George Bush was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, that's when all this heat was coming down on the agency, which flowed directly from the Watergate thing. I mean, people kept saying, well, there's a big, huge Watergate burglary case, and they all did us investigation. Well, why the heck did they set up the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse right after that? It was because of this whole assassination thing that they basically uncovered during the House Select Committee investigation. So they said, look, we better reopen the Kennedy assassination thing. And so they did, out of Watergate. And then they opened up the whole investigation of the CIA.
So those people perhaps were, how many, 83, 82 names on that list?
42 names.
42 names. So perhaps those people were placed within, what, the board of directors of?
Well, they're different. A lot of them are national security reporters. And the media says, oh, good, it's a really good idea. Let's get a person who's part of the national security community to come in, because they know all the contacts, they do all that kind of stuff. So they end up getting a person who's part of it. They say, oh, we knew he was with the Central Intelligence Agency, but they didn't know that he was still with the CIA.
And what is the directive of those individuals?
They are to conceal covert operations, make sure that none of those get revealed. None of them get reported if they do get picked up on. Spin the stories in a way they're basically propaganda people. You know, they're a ministry of propaganda. They refer to it as public information officers in the CIA. They're actually there to craft reality in a way that comports. They're espionage agents. you know. And for example, when during the whole Iran-Contra investigation, when I was digging up all the information and finding out who was flying the airplanes down and smuggling the dope and smuggling the weapons and all that kind of stuff, I was having regular meetings with sources on this thing. And when Ross Perot called me he was on President Reagan's National Security Advisory Committee and was investigating the MIAs, the missing in action in Vietnam, which was his big brief. And he was convinced that he was being lied to all the time by major national security officials. And he was upset about this, and he ended up calling me saying that 3 different people on different occasions had recommended that he talk with me, that I knew something about these covert operations people and what they were doing and how it related back to Southeast Asia and the drug smuggling and all that, which he ended up concluding or opining was directly involved in most of the MIAs that were left in there. That they'd been involved off the communication lines in dealing with the narcotics and trafficking stuff, and a lot of them got left in there when everybody left. And so he wanted to talk about that. So he had when Ross Perot was flying back and forth into Washington, meeting with me, and me taking him around, introducing him to some of these sources, the word got out on this. Jonathan Beatty from Time Magazine wanted to write a story about this whole off-the-shelf enterprise, and he was talking with Perot about it, and he wrote the story, and it got spiked by the national security editor at the Washington Bureau of Time Magazine. Turns out that guy was a full-time CIA guy. And he didn't want that information revealed. The guy told me, admitted it to me, the Washington Bureau chief. The national security officer, he called me because he wanted me, once Perot announced that he was going to be running for the presidency, this guy calls me up and wants to have me talk to him about Ross Perot. He wanted to get dirt to dump on Ross Perot, you know, I mean, just doing his same job. And he said, I sat down with him over at Time Magazine in Washington, D.C., and he said, you know, Dan, he said, I know that you probably feel that you don't have any reason to want to talk to me. He said, because I imagine you probably know that I'm the one that spiked the story, you know, that Beatty was going to do.
Why would he admit that?
Well, because he thought I knew it. He thought I knew it already, which I didn't. I didn't know it.
Huh.
You know, and so he says, you know, and so I know that, you know, you may have a lot of reasons not want to talk to me, but, you know, I'd really like to find out about Ross. You know, everybody tells me you spent more time with him than most anybody else around here in Washington. You know more about why he might be running and all that kind of stuff. So I'd just like to have you see if you would talk to me. So I said, well, you got that part right. You know, you're right. There's not any reason in the world why I would talk to you.
Wow.
And I left.
You kind of blew his opportunity, Brennan.
Sure. I wouldn't have pissed on him if he was on fire, you know. And so bottom line is, so I know that they're there, and he's a full-time Central Intelligence Agency officer, and there are 42 of them. There were 42 of them back when, in fact, in '76, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse got the file.
Okay, so 42, 30 years ago,
then,
how many now perhaps?
More.
Yeah.
And they view it to be as that's the whole problem in that thing. The whole thing, you set up a special bureau that is basically not only authorized, but trained and encouraged to commit criminal acts all the time. Blackmailing people, you know, sabotaging things, blowing things up, killing people, you know, overthrowing elected governments in other countries of this. You know, the minute you turn on them, the minute you start to try to do something domestically as the congressman or a senator to try to stop them from doing something, they turn those tools right on you. And don't even think anything about it. I mean, the Constitution is nothing but an impediment to them. And so they just blow right through it.
And apparently have been tremendously effective in their
endeavors. And this was publicly identified by William Brennan of the United States Supreme Court in a major speech that he did at Georgetown Law School back in 1990 or so. He said that this problem of the rise of this national security state bureaucracy and the CIA and the covert operations people in its attempt to usurp the power of governing here in the United States was the most serious constitutional threat since the American Civil War. And he was right.
That story got out, at least they were able to.
And he was right. And he was right.
So you're going for
This has been going on for a long time. In fact, the CIA struck back against Frank Church, who chaired the Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. They ended up diverting millions of dollars. They took millions of dollars out of the Nuganhan Bank in Australia, which they had set up as covert operations bank, and funneled it through the banks in South Africa into the election of Senator Frank Church in Idaho back in 1980. And it all showed up weird funding of pro-gun lobbies, anti-ERA lobbies, all this kind of stuff, trashing Frank Church for his support of the Equal Rights Amendment in opposition to pro-gun legislation, all that kind of stuff, and ended up defeating it. They did the same thing to Dick Clark down in Iowa, because Iowa Senator Clark had opposed CIA covert operations in Africa. And they targeted these guys. And in that 1980 election that brought in Reagan and Bush, that they threw out 6 United States senators to get rid of them because they were enemies of the national security state bureaucracy. And I mean, it was a civil war. It was a major civil war. I've actually given a 3-hour seminar at UC Santa Barbara on that very specific thing called the Second American Civil War, which I could get you a copy of. Which you should if I can get you a set of these things. I gave I don't know, probably 20 3-hour seminars at UC Santa Barbara, all about these things. They're all broadcast quality videotapes.
Oh, great.
That I could get you a set of them, and you can just dub them, and you can put them here in the library.
Thank you very much.
And you can sit down and just take a look, and this gives all the details, names, dates, times, everything about how this happened.